Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Way Between podcast. I'm Adam Dietz here with Nick Egan. Nick, thanks for joining today.
Yeah, always great to be here.
So, just so you know, Nick and I are a couple of PhDs in Asian comparative studies, philosophy, and religion. Nick has been basically a lifelong Buddhist practitioner, and I've been a Buddhist scholar for almost 30 years now, in one way or another. And the what we're doing here mostly, almost every episode is about looking at philosophy of the world, and looking at it mostly from a Buddhist perspective in reality. So we have had a whole entire season where we looked over Western philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, and then of course Buddhist philosophy. And today what I want to do is each little segment now we go back for a second round at Western philosophy. So previously we looked at Socrates, and now what I want to do is look at Socrates' student Plato. So Nick, do you have any background with Socrates and Plato, or have you thought about their work in terms of Buddhist scholarship before?
I never really have very much. I feel like my academic exposure to them was pretty early on, and then from there, it's like mostly focused in Asia. So it'll be interesting for us to talk through some of this.
Can you say anything about your early exposure to them? Because I know for myself, I'll tell a little story. It's really important for my development as a philosopher and a spiritual practitioner, was that I started kind of fumbling around with seeking different spiritual paths in my teenage years. And then when I entered into university, Philosophy 101 just hit me like with like a ton of bricks. And
Mhm.
I was exposed to Socrates, and the urgency of seeking wisdom was really profound to me. So when you say that you had some early exposure, could you say a little more about that?
Well, the thing that spoke to me, I think, the most when I'm thinking about Socrates in particular was just the dialectic method, right? And so it's like asking questions to get to whatever the heart of truth is. And then it's been so long, like that actually applies to almost a Madhyamaka, meaning the middle way. And so there's a similar kind of approach to discussion. And it's like you reduce things down to until they become absurd and then look for the truth that's there in some ways. In Madhyamaka, they try not to reify the truth, but obviously in the West, there is an idea of some sort of truth, beauty, all of that.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that's a really good point that you make because so many people actually are exposed to the Socratic methods and the dialogues, the style. People do it, have Socratic seminar in their classes,
Yeah.
but we also realize the roots of Western culture are Socratic. Like
Mhm.
journalism is the Socratic method. The court system is Socratic method. Even the scientific inquiry is Socratic method. You kind
Yeah.
of have this idea that you don't know anything, and you're trying to just draw out some kind of truth using these methods. So I really
And
appreciate you mentioning that.
yeah, I'll say for my in my professional life, I mostly focus on executive coaching, and that it really is, I would say, pinned to the Socratic method, at least in some way. So it's like this idea of I'm gonna come with an open mind, ask a bunch of questions until some kind of pattern reveals itself, and then hopefully we can work together to disrupt that pattern if it's something that we want to change.
That's a great point, man. It's just another example where, psychology and therapy and all this also use the Socratic method. Like you come into it trying to know nothing and trying to draw something out of the other person. And that journalism is like Socrates going to the public square and saying, you think you're all that? Well, show me, prove it. And,
Mhm.
and half the time they weren't, and they were like, whoops. And that's like a
Yeah.
journalist going up to these guys, these hot shots, a true journalism, and asking them, what do you really think about this situation? And find out, "Oh, okay, well, maybe you're full of it. And
Yeah.
then Socrates would be like, okay, if we found out that you're full of it, let's work together and try to find something real together. And if you're in good faith, then you grow with him.
Right.
But if not, then you have people that would try to destroy him, and just the same way that you have people who try to destroy journalists who are just doing their job. It's still a tale as old as time in Western culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting parallel. I've actually never considered that. There's a thing in coaching, executive coaching, life coaching, whatever kind of coaching, the idea that you have to get permission to coach somebody. And so you don't want to just come and do, people that learn the methods early on, they're going to go like coach their friend without saying, "Hey, would you like some coaching on that?" But the idea is that backfires because people aren't ready. People don't want to have their beliefs dismantled and analyzed, and then even if it's in furtherance of their growth. And so they can have a sort of nasty reaction to that. So it's really important early on to not do any of that. Psychology too. It's like, the sophomore psychology major, and as I was one, and it's like, you go around like psychoanalyzing everybody. First of all, you don't really know what you're doing, but second, like psychoanalyzing without permission is not the most fruitful thing to do.
Yeah, and so you don't want to end up like Socrates and have to drink poison hemlock and your enemies come
Yeah,
after you.
I would not willingly.
Yeah. So that's a really good point there too, as well. So I'm glad we're getting off to an interesting start here. So for those of you who don't know, the little background we were kind of hinting at was that Socrates was, basically considered the founder of philosophy in many ways. There's the pre-Socratics, but Socrates, he was put to death for his antics, so to speak, and his student Plato took up the mantle. Socrates actually didn't write anything at all. He kind of was against writing in a lot of ways because he wanted to keep the ideas fluid. He didn't want it to be concrete. So Plato kind of like follows him a little bit in the beginning, and he writes these different dialogues, early, middle, and late. The early dialogues are really just like almost court transcription of different dialogues that Socrates did have in his life with various people around the town, friends, powerful people, artisans. And so the early dialogues, Plato actually is like a stenographer, right, for these
Mhm.
dialogues. Then you have these middle dialogues where he starts to put his own philosophy into it, Plato's own philosophy, and he still keeps it in the format. Oh, here's Socrates having a dialogue with someone, but actually half of it is Plato's own ideas. And the late dialogues are almost purely fictional, where it's almost entirely Plato's philosophy presented through this format. So today, what I want to look at though is the Allegory of the Cave, which comes from Plato's Republic, which comes from a middle dialogue.
Mhm.
And the this Republic is that Socrates and a group have, I believe they were leaving a kind of a festival, and they go back to one of the person's homes for like a post party after the festival type of thing. And they somehow start discussing what's the best way to form a country, form a nation. And again, this is the core of Western culture, actually, the Plato's Republic. This has been studied in ancient Greece, studied in the Renaissance, and so many of our institutions are modeled after this very important book, the Plato's Republic. So they're trying to do their best to shape what an ideal country would be like. So we've taken many ideas from that and used them over time. So they're talking about, okay, well, you need protection, so you need soldiers, you need food, so you need farmers, and then they get to the point where like, okay, we need education. They realize, don't you want to live in an educated place? Don't you want to live where people are virtuous and just? And won't that make your whole country better? Won't that attract other people to come around? So if you want that, if that's good, then you want to have education, like a virtuous, just, wise education. Nick, does this sound familiar to you? Have you heard much of this before?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely bringing back my days in undergrad, kind of
Yeah.
reading the
Do you have any
Republic,
initial
at
thoughts,
least.
initial thoughts on Socrates, Plato, or the formation of a ideal society?
No, I mean, it's interesting. Like, there are a lot of, if we're taking a Buddhist lens to this, there are a lot of sutras that actually are sort of advice to kings or advice to rulers about how to be a just ruler, how to be kind of a dharmic ruler. And one of the greatest, it's not a sutra, but kind of much later than Shakyamuni Buddha was Ashoka. And he took a lot of the principles of Buddhism and created, ideally at least trending toward sort of a virtuous empire. I mean, you can argue like, is it possible for any empire to be virtuous? But I mean, that was the goal at the time. And so this notion of philosophy kind of as the touchstone for creating a just society is, I think, a really good one, and it definitely is aligned across all cultures, I believe.
Well, it's about showing up, right? I mean, if we're just in a mountain hermitage, we probably aren't having as much influence as if we were trying to get a little bit of, political power, and try to push political power in certain ways. Sometimes, in the West, we have this idea that we should be averse to power and that, the noble person doesn't want power and this kind of thing. And, in reality, if you're close to a king or if you're close to power, you probably have a better chance of helping to influence a lot more lives, right? It seems like just common sense.
Yeah, that's a conventional perspective for sure, and I'm not necessarily going against it. But for my deep Buddhist leanings, I would say that the person, a realized hermit in the mountains, can have very little contact with anybody and not be in a king's court, but still have great influence in society.
Okay.
And
But
so
but
it's
if you
like the whole notion of like engaged Buddhism where you have to like go out and do stuff, and it's like, yeah, okay, that's fine, good. Like I'm not saying don't go out and do things that you believe in, but at the same time, at least in Dharmic traditions, there is this notion that you can create massive effects through internal meditation. There's actually been some interesting studies. I don't know if they've been debunked or not, but there was some, I want to say it was TM, maybe transcendental meditation, and they got a certain subset of the population in certain cities, maybe you've heard this, to meditate at certain times. So it'd be like, hey, first Sunday of every month we're gonna meditate here. And then they looked at like the crime statistics, and
uh,
the crime during those times went significantly down. I mean, maybe it's like the meditators themselves are out
yeah,
running
the
amok
criminals are
when they're not
meditating.
when they're not meditating. So we're kind of anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I believe that there's a lot of reverberating consequences from internal practices.
Well, so a little background. This kind of relates very closely to the lineage from Nick and I because Nick and I both attended California Institute of Integral Studies, formerly Institute of Asian Studies, founded by Alan Watts and
Mhm,
Haridas Chowdhury,
mhm,
right? More or less. Dr. Haridas Chowdhury was a student of Sri Aurobindo, famous Indian philosopher. Sri Aurobindo, very much this kind of mentality, integral yoga. That if you do
mhm,
yoga, you could bring peace into this world.
mhm,
So then going from the lineage from Sri Aurobindo to Haridas Chaudhuri, then Haridas Chaudhuri founded universities, said integral philosophy.
mhm,
The integral philosophy that if you do, this type of thinking and you bring it into philosophy, into scholarship, academics, teaching, learning, students. And then a mutual mentor of Nick and I is Dr. Yi Wu from the Institute of Integral Studies. And he developed a system of integral life philosophy that we should, yes, try to reach the highest level, like
mhm,
Sri Aurobindo, understand the highest level, but then bring that into our words, like Haridas Chaudhuri, integral philosophy, and then bring it into our actions. So we had an integral life philosophy triangle
mhm,
of the highest level, your words, and your actions.
mhm.
So if we can get the hermit from the mountains to have his enlightenment and also give us some words, thank you very much. We could appreciate those words. Yeah. If we get the hermit from the mountains also to sometimes give us some actions, thank you very much. We appreciate your actions too. And I always love coming back to the middle way,
Mhm,
right? Don't be too renunciatory. Don't be
mhm.
too active and exhaust your energy, right? If you try to, how many people have you met in your life before that try to do everything and they're just like miserable and they're rude and they can't really help anyone out. They're exhausted, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you have to have a deep reservoir of energies to be able to even consider helping somebody else. So that I think is really important. That's crucial.
So for our ancient Greek philosophers showing up, right? They were showing up to try and have the theory behind what would make a great country. And it's interesting that you mentioned the king because what they came up with was the ideal would be a philosopher king. So someone
Yeah.
who's wise and virtuous and has ultimate power would do the best for the people, actually.
Yeah. Same thing. So in Buddhism, there's a chakravartin, which is like a wheel holder, and it just means, a virtuous emperor, a virtuous king. And it's
Mm,
it's actually on a par. So this is interesting. Like when Shakyamuni Buddha was born, the guy that came who was sort of the rishi, the wise sage that was telling his future based on his face and all of that. And he said he's either going to be a Chakravartin, like a philosopher king, or a Buddha. And so it was like, and then that was what spun off the whole thing. So yeah, the concept of philosopher king, I think is, I mean, in China, especially like in Taoism, that's a huge part of at least the cosmological consideration.
yeah, and just so you know, for reference, if anyone wants to go back, we have a whole entire episode about the life of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, and just wanted to let you know that you guys can check that out on our different sites and our different podcast platforms. But going back to tying this together a little bit, first, I have a question for you to keep in mind as we discuss this. Would you also agree, and we'll give an example of it, that education is very important in this type of ideal country because Plato and his friends and Socrates through the dialogues strongly agree that education is very important.
Mhm.
And when they want to describe a certain type of education, that's where they give us the allegory of the cave. And for those of you who don't know, we'll briefly go over it and you can look up images on it and find it better than just hearing it. But Nick, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like education, I'd be curious about the original Greek word for it that we're translating as education. Because the way I'm thinking about it, and I think probably the way you're thinking about it too, especially regarding the allegory of the cave, it's not like in the modern West, we think of education as a series of facts about the world that's given to us from somebody else. But here, it's used much more along the lines of what I would consider critical thinking, which is like I have a system with which I can measure and understand different concepts and then choose which one is the best for taking action on.
That's an excellent segue because as we start to talk about this allegory of the cave, the main theme is that you have to experience education yourself.
Mhm.
And it's just fundamental beyond words. So the allegory of the cave is meant to illustrate this exact point. It it basically let's start to imagine it, okay? So as they describe it in the Republic, you have people who are chained, who can't move, who have spent their whole entire lives in chains. And sometimes when I teach this to the philosophy 101 students, they get sidetracked and they start thinking about different aspects of it. But it was a very brief allegory just meant to describe a couple different points. So we kind of just want to go with it and work with Plato and when we just imagining this situation. So the people are chained facing a cave wall, and behind them is a fire, and in between them and the fire are people that are holding little minuets, right? That's what they're called, yeah, little
Yeah, little
puppets.
shadow puppets,
Yeah,
shadow
shadow
puppets.
puppets.
Yeah.
So the puppets cast shadows on the wall in front of these people. So the people who are chained, they can't look side to side. They've been chained just only to look at these shadows their whole entire life. So if you imagine that you see this your whole entire life, then that's all they know. And so among them, they could hear each other. They make little stories and talk about what the shadows are doing. Some are become experts on the shadows, predicting what will happen next. All these different discussions about the shadows. And so they have a whole society, a whole culture based on these shadows. So imagine, they say, if someone were taken out of those chains and they were led up a path that ascends to an opening at the top of the cave. So that person, if they were taken from their chains, they would be really having a lot of difficulty. They wouldn't be able to move very well. They would be totally disoriented because all they knew was shadows, and they're taken up this path. Then the path is meant to illustrate the upward journey of the soul, is one of the translations that I think is very poignant that I first was exposed to as a freshman in college. So that they take this upward journey of the soul is like them being taken up this path towards the light and the exit of the cave. So then once they exit the cave, they're even more disoriented. It's so bright, it takes some adjustment time. And after they finally adjust, they see the whole entire world before them. And now it's not just shadows, it's a reality. So before, maybe they saw a shadow of a tree. Well, now I see a
Mhm.
real tree.
Mhm.
Before, maybe they saw a shadow of sheep. Now I see a real sheep. So this is the idea of education, that you go from what you think you know to experience, truth. I think in a Buddhist sense, we could say true suchness.
Yeah, it's definitely true suchness. So like tatata or tatagata garba, however you want to think about that. It's so interesting because there's so many ways to read that are different layers, right? It's like what is real, what is true, and then thinking about there's layers of like it's the it's the projection from the light that's onto the cave wall, and then I'm moving away and moving up through that, and then seeing the actual thing. But then there's this whole idea of you can't, the person goes back to try to tell other people and they can't. It's really hard for them to take in that reality because you have no framework to really understand it.
That's the next part of the story is
Yeah.
that basically they're going to be Bodhisattva now, right?
They're trying. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
trying.
So,
Yeah.
so they come back they come back from this experience, right? And they want to help people because what why would you want people to be living in shadows and chains if they could have this experience? So part of what they say is, wouldn't you rather be completely impoverished and just having the most difficult life, whatever, above in the realm of reality? Wouldn't you do anything in your power to reach that understanding? Wouldn't you do anything in your power to stay with that understanding? And wouldn't it be true that nothing could possibly compel you to go back to live in chains and look at shadows? So that's part of it. That we should all seek this fundamentally, number one, because okay. And at this point, I will say that as a freshman in college, I realized 90% of my values and ethics were not my own.
Hmm.
They were just shadows inherited to me by the culture I grew up in.
Hmm.
You know, at that time, I won't get into details, but I will say that fundamentally changed the way I look at my own ethics and values.
Hmm.
And I think that's a big part of the point is that the urgency of Socrates and Plato is like there's nothing more important than for you to seek wisdom and practice virtue over and over and over and over again. There's different stories about why it's fundamental, including Socrates saying the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah.
So this person comes back down, as Nick was saying, and they feel so passionate to help the people who are still in chains. Well, they are ridiculed, almost murdered, is what they say would happen. They think they're crazy. What are you talking about? Because they only know shadows. So then this person actually what they have to do is they have to go back into the shadow game
Hmm.
and show people their understanding, describe, okay, here's a shadow tree. Listen to what I can say about this tree now that I've seen the truth. That
Hmm.
they can describe this tree like crazy. And all of a sudden, the people in the shadow are like, oh my God, you must really know something. And maybe now some of them want to go and say, I believe you, I'll go follow along. It's
Yeah.
almost like sometimes we say wisdom is beyond words, right? Different traditions,
Hmm.
wisdom is beyond words. Okay, well, you also have to go back into words to help point the way. I think it reminds me
Yeah.
of that a little bit too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. And even then, if I recall correctly, it's not like everybody in the cave is really keen on it. Right? It's like some portion of them, there are some people that are like, "No, I'm fine with my shadows. Thank you very much, sir."
Yeah,
Like that kind of, yeah.
it's very, very brief.
Hmm.
And really they just say, wouldn't they all they say is like one line basically, more or less, what I recall is, wouldn't the people think he's crazy?
Yeah,
That's about it.
totally.
That's
Yeah.
about it, you know?
Yeah.
And then they, because they're together, they're philosophers, they're working together, they're in good faith. They kind of just take the point as, yeah, okay, education needs to be this kind of education, revealed truth that you experience,
Hmm.
virtuous education, wise education, seeking the upward journey of the soul towards truth. So
Yeah.
they continue on with their building their republic, agreeing that this is so important in society.
Right, right. Yeah, it's so interesting because there's like this salvific element to it, meaning there's a claim that if you through education, through what we're talking about as which I would consider like philosophy or examination or even just reflection, thoughtfulness, that you can become better and become closer to beauty and truth and all of that and virtue. Whereas it's funny, I feel like later philosophy, certainly in the West, has sort of lost that. It just became like a way to describe the way things actually are. So like ontological as opposed to any salvific element. But
Yeah, there's always an undercurrent of like philosophers saying, look, philosophy is broken, let me try and fix it and return to that.
Mhm.
Right? And there's always kind of like, yeah, you're kind of cool, but you're kind of just one guy out on the sides, and the rest of us are having these arguments we want to keep having to show our
Right.
logical chops. You know?
Yeah, exactly. It became the contact sport as opposed to,
Yeah.
yeah,
But I
something
want to
else.
go back to something that you said about, the sense of examining life is fundamental in Greek philosophy. Okay, just examining life itself seems like it's the first step on this crazy journey.
Mhm.
The scientific method is about examining things, examining life, and they come to some of the most amazing truths, same as the mystical traditions. For
Yeah.
example, that we all come from the Big Bang, that we're all
Mhm.
made of stardust. This
Mhm.
is very mystical. Confucius also says, sorry, Confucius also highlights the great learning from the ancient sage kings that, or describing the ancient sage kings, that in order to rule the entire world, there are a series of steps that go from outer to inner. And the very first step is investigate things. When
Hmm.
you investigate things, then it starts this whole journey of you really understanding their true nature. Then you feel reverential towards them. Then you can use that feeling in society. So, in some ways, to me, it's all coming together where just education, investigating, examining is step one.
Yeah.
Once you kind of, or Socratic ignorance, once you know that you don't know something, then you
Yeah.
can start to look into it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like an attitude of playful curiosity in a lot of ways, which I think is so helpful when we're just engaging with things that we don't understand or even things that are off-putting to us. Like, okay, I can get curious about that. Let's see, let's pull on the thread a little bit and see what's there.
And I think the point is like if you just examine or investigate anything for long enough and hard enough and thoughtful enough and sincere enough, you're going to get to some pretty interesting places and have, and hopefully, I mean, if you keep going, you'll have some kind of enlightenment. Like if you just look at this pen for long enough, you'll start to think about, oh, I don't know, maybe its origin, or maybe you
Yeah.
think about its molecules that are in there. You know, you
Yeah.
investigate it, and then it's atoms and it's being and non-being. You
Right.
know?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. You can if you analyze any kind of phenomena, it's like it will have an arising, like kind of staying and abiding, and then a destruction. If you can understand that, that's you're well on your way to understanding interdependence, interconnection, therefore emptiness, therefore the nature of mind, therefore, all of that good stuff.
All of that good stuff, indeed.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we're doing on time. I can cut this part out.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Okay, I'll cut this out later, but let me think. Should we start wrapping it up
I think so.
okay,
Yeah, I think that was a good little segue.
okay, so then next time we'll talk about, I think maybe we could save this Aristotle piece. I'll tease it because Aristotle talks about the goal of life.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to wrap up for the day right here. And next time, what we'll be looking at when we circle back, next, we're going to keep going through Greek philosophy, Western philosophy, Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, and then circle back maybe in season three again to Western philosophy. So a big, long wait and a long tease is that when we go look at season three, we'll look at what Aristotle says is the main goal of life. So don't look it up so you don't have any spoilers and we can look at it together on on this on this podcast. Nick, do you have any final thoughts about where Socrates and Plato and the allegory of the cave fit into just broader life in general? It's always important for us to look at our philosophy in terms of our own daily life and in maybe Buddhist practice.
Yeah, I would say the highest form of education from at least the perspective as we're discussing it is that playful curiosity and being willing to take the time to really think things through and think about the second order, third order consequences and the nature of how things actually are and just go deeply with them and don't just take things at face value, but really be able to think deeply and analyze things, I think is the essence of good education.
I appreciate you saying that. And I always love when we're having these conversations because it always triggers something for me in a good way. It reminds me of the most important thing we can examine is ourself, our own thoughts, our own biases, our own filter. That's what the only thing we have really are in charge of is ourself. And our filter, you know, to use the phrase filter clearly means that's how we filter our reality. That's how we perceive our reality, both coming in and going out. So when we examine ourselves, we can get rid of different preconceived notions. We can make sure that everything we're doing is conscious and mindful, and it's really what we're choosing to do, not just inherited or mindless. And if we're doing things that are mindful, if we're doing things that are clear, if we're doing things that we've examined ourselves and we're then we can have much more influence in the world in a good way. So basically sincerity is the most powerful way for you to influence the world, right? So when you have a clear, sincere mind and you examine yourself and you know what you're really all about, then one, you could have a deep sense of enlightenment in yourself, hopefully, but two, you'll be a conscious participant in this world, in your own relationships, in your own deeds, in your own actions. So I wanted just to maybe leave with that final thought, and I think that that's a good stopping place for the day. Like I said, next time on this track of Western philosophy, we'll look at Aristotle. I think next episode we'll be looking at Confucius and his next student, because today we looked at Socrates and his next student Plato. So next episode we'll look at Confucius and his next student Mencius. I just want to say thank you all very much for joining us today. I hope it was a good conversation for you, and thank you very much to Nick for coming on.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me.
All right, see you next time, everybody.